Yesterday, we interviewed this guy who, on the inaugural day, went to the capital of Michigan and gave this very brief speech. So let's listen to it.
BLM, Antifa, Boogaloo, and right-wing militias.
He says BLM, Antifa, and right-wing militias.
They are the antibodies, not the disease that is destroying our country. The disease is a country run by two corrupt political parties that do not care about you. So deeply incestuous with corporations that they are indistinguishable from each other. A government that spent 6 months debating whether to give their own people $600, but only 24 hours to unanimously agree to give billions of dollars to foreign tyrannical governments and corporations. A government that has bombed villages overseas my entire life for my supposed safety here. This is a call for unity. For all of American people that realize the true threat against us to come together. For every mother mourning her children that was killed by police, for every business crushed down by state lockdowns, for every broken soldier sent to fight wars that have no point. This is our last chance to avoid either a tyrannical government or a bloody and pointless civil war among American people who do not have that much against each other and have more in common than they realize. And a message to the government: we come in peace. We do not intend to commit violence, but I am pleading with you, with tears in my eyes and cracks in my voice. If you continue to oppress the American people, they will remain rational no longer. Thank you.
So that guy looked like a right-wing militia guy to me, even though I noticed he was wearing the rainbow flag for the LGBT, and he was talking about unity with Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And I was like, who's that guy? And what does that remind me of? That reminds me of Fred Hampton. That reminds me of 1969 when Black Panthers aligned with Confederate flag-wielding working-class whites. What? Ethnic and racial groups each created their own social services and activist networks to combat every kind of oppression. One was the Young Patriot Organization, the YPO, which was based in hillbilly Harlem, an uptown neighborhood of Chicago, populated by displaced white Southerners. So poor white people from the South came to Chicago. They were also treated horribly. Many YPO members flaunted racist, controversial symbols associated with Southern pride, such as the Confederate flag. But like blacks and Latinos, the white young patriots and their families experienced discrimination in Chicago too. In their case, it was because they were poor and from the South. You see this? Black Panthers, Confederate flag. Do you see this? Do you see this? Eventually, young patriots rejected their deeply embedded ideas of white supremacy. What? What? Eventually, young patriots rejected their deeply embedded ideas of white supremacy and even dropped the Confederate flag as they realized how much they had in common with the Black Panthers and Latino youth lords. Despite many differences, the groups united under the umbrella of economic justice. So that's a class struggle. That's Black Panthers and white racists coming together to realize their common enemy and their common struggle, their class struggle. And guess what they did? They immediately killed those guys. That scares the hell out of the establishment. That's what scares them. This scares them. And that gentleman I brought on my show was pro-Black Lives Matter. He was pro-LGBTQ. He was anti-ICE. He was anti-war, and he was anti-both parties and the corporate takeover of our country. And so I brought on this guy. He's supposed to be a socialist from the World Socialist website because they were covering a strike. He was brought on to talk about a strike that they were covering. And that guy sounded, you're going to hear what he sounds like, and it's horrible. Now, I think they do a lot of great work over at the World Socialist website. We feature their work here all the time, but you're going to see how they're misguided and why they're bound to lose, because they have no idea how to reach out to people who are aligned with themselves ideologically. He has no idea how to reach out to that guy. That guy who I brought on my show. Go watch the interview. The sweetest guy. He's been unemployed. He's gotten no COVID relief. He's pro-Black Lives Matter. He's pro-LGBTQ. He's anti-war, and he hates both the parties. That seemed the guy who would be ripe for a socialist party to have a message to help that guy to come over to their side. That's what they're supposed to do. In fact, it's incumbent on them to have a recruiting message for people like that. Because as we all know, economic disasters create people who are ripe to be taken over by right-wing demagogues. So that's why if you're a true socialist or a leftist, you got to get to them. You got to have a message for them, especially someone who's as open-minded as that guy, who is not racist, who is against the war, who's against both parties, who's for Black Lives Matter, and who's for LGBTQ. And you watch, this is going to be one of the craziest interviews, I think, maybe the craziest interview I've ever did on this show. So here we go.
Sure. Listen, first of all, thank you for inviting me. But I must admit, when you invited me, and I'm more than happy to discuss the Hunts Point strike, which is very critical. I didn't realize who the guest before me was, and I must admit that it's very disturbing to believe that when you talk about left or progressive politics, that this has anything to do with the politics of the Boogaloo Boys and such extreme right-wing forces. This guy indicated, by the way, that he was at the demonstration in Lansing in April, which stormed the state capitol. And that was a demonstration which was very much aimed at opposing any lockdowns in the state of Michigan or lockdowns anywhere.
Because the government told people to lock their businesses down, Jerry, and then they didn't give them any money. So people were desperate. People are desperate, Jerry. I don't know if you know what's going on, but this isn't happening in any other country in the world. When they lock down your business in another country, they pay their workers their salary, and they give them health care. Neither of that is happening in this country, Jerry. And so that's why people were protesting against the lockdowns, because they weren't giving them any money. He leaves that part out conveniently so he can demonize deplorables. Here we go.
The slightest measures to protect public health against.
So he's saying this about that guy I had on my show. That guy didn't say anything. Like I said, that we never even talked about. Anyway, here we go.
COVID and this extreme right-wing demonstration financed by the Betsy DeVos and other right-wingers was used to advance the herd immunity policy, which has left more than 420,000 people dead in the United States. And in fact, one of the chief demands of the Hunts Point workers is against the terrible conditions that have led to 400 infections and 6 deaths amongst the Hunts Point workers. I mean, the idea that somehow this is the unity of left and right. I mean, what is there is a historical precedent. The Nazis called themselves revolutionists. They called themselves opponents of even, well, they call.
So he's literally calling a guy who was a guest on my show right before him, a guy who's pro-LGBTQ, pro-Black Lives Matter, anti-police brutality, anti-war, anti-imperialism, and anti the two-party corporate duopoly. And he's anti-ICE. And this guy's calling him a Nazi. It's kind of like the people like this on the left want to drive a wedge in our country.
The international Jewish capitalist conspiracy. This has nothing to do with left politics. It has nothing to do with progressive politics. My movement, the Socialist Equality Party, we're seeking to build a genuine movement of the working class. That's why we've intervened among the striking workers at Hunts Point. We are above all internationalists. I mean, the right wing promotes nationalism. They tell American workers, as Trump does, that the cause of our problems are Mexican workers stealing our jobs, everything the trade unions have promoted for 40 years that have produced a disaster for the working class. American workers are in a struggle against global corporations global banks, and we cannot take one step forward unless we unite with our brothers and sisters all over the world against the capitalist system.
But not people willing to unite with you in your own country. You're going to be able to vet people in other countries for their whatever it is you don't like about them. But a guy right here who's, again, pro-LGBTQ, pro-Black Lives Matter, anti-police brutality, anti-ICE, that guy's somehow beyond the pale for guys like that. And you see why lefties don't organize right. You see why. You see why you never heard of this guy. You see why this guy's never accomplished anything.
So I really wanted to make that very clear. It is flirting with such elements, they're libertarian elements, right-wing elements like that. I mean, those are the people who...
You're flirting with libertarian... Oh, my God. You're not allowed to talk to libertarians. You're flirting with You're flirting? You mean I'm working with other Americans on a common interest? Like when Bernie Sanders works with that right-winger Mike Lee on Yemen, that's bad.
Stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th.
This guy.
And they're being pulled around by the nose by very powerful political and corporate forces, using the anger that people feel over the economic disaster, small businesses being put out of work, but they are being mobilized for right-wing purposes. We oppose that.
So I just want to remind you who this guy is. So if you haven't seen that the video he dropped yesterday, the interview with him, you should go watch it. It's really fascinating. I was surprised almost every time he said something. So here, I'll just play this little piece for you. You're anti-war. You're for peace. You're against racism. You're against police brutality. What else? What would be some other big things?
Pro-sex work decriminalization, legalize all drugs, end all the wars, close the ICE detainment camps. Pretty much our core foundation is if you're not a bigoted piece of shit and you understand that both parties are the problem and you're willing to do something about it and you're willing to get out in the streets and you're willing to make your voice heard, you're welcome. It doesn't matter where you come from or what you do. In that video, it doesn't show it, but I walked in, the woman standing next to me is a local BLM organizer for Lansing, Michigan, and I walked in with the local anti-fascist organization as well.
So you're not about hating gays, and you don't hate the gays?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I was told that...
Matter of fact, I'm not the most straight man myself, so...
So he's got a gay pride flag behind him, and he just admits that there's some question about his straightness. He's pro-BLM. He's anti-ICE. He's anti both parties. He's a victim of the COVID right now because he doesn't have a job and he didn't get his first $600 check. He hasn't gotten any checks, and he's out of job. He doesn't have any. Look, and you can see it looks like he lives in a small apartment. So this guy is a victim of capitalism like everybody, and he's a victim of this government. And this guy calls him a Nazi. That guy who's got a gay pride flag, who went out and did security for Black Lives Matter, who showed up at the Michigan State House with a Black Lives Matter activist and an Antifa activist. He calls this guy a Nazi. That's what this guy's doing. That is the exact opposite thing you're supposed to. That is what Hillary Clinton did, and she lost to Donald Trump. If you're an organizer of workers, you're supposed to be able to have a message for that guy to get him over to whatever you want him to do. What's your message? He doesn't have a message. This is another one of those guys who claims to speak for workers, but I guarantee you, anytime a worker gets anywhere close to guys like this, they're repulsed. So I heard him say he was against ICE and he was anti-war. He was against the corporate takeover of our government, and he was against police brutality. Now, some people are going to switch this to say Jimmy Dore's defending Boogaloo Boy, racist, white nationalists, or whatever. I'm not doing that. I don't know about the Boogaloo Boys specifically. All I know is what that guy told me. I'm talking about that guy, and so was he. So I was talking about my guest on my show who says he's in the Boogaloo Boys, and he says that you have to be not a racist, you have to be anti-racist to be in the Boogaloo. That's what he was saying. So just so you know, so I know people are going to twist this and say Jimmy is defending Boogaloo Boys and white race. I'm not. I was talking about the guest I had on my show and the stuff he said. Jerry, this guy, was pretending he was saying the exact opposite of what he was saying. So here we go. So I heard him say he was against ICE and he was anti-war. He was against the corporate takeover of our government and he was against police brutality. How do you reach out to people like that? Or do you just ignore them?
Well, we don't reach out to them. We're fighting to reach.
That's not how organizing works. And that's why he's a failure. That's not how it works. You find common ground with people and you organize together. That's not how you don't what? You don't reach out to workers who are anti-racist, who are pro-LGBTQ, who are anti-police brutality, who are anti-ICE. You can't reach out. So you're a failure. That's all. So I just wanted to show you this and show you this is the kind of stuff that's wrong with the left. This guy is bent. He's an authoritarian. He wants fascism. And I'll show you. They want to have censorship. This is the authoritarian left, and they just want to be able to control things. That's just what he's saying.
Out to millions and millions of workers who are.
That guy's a worker. He's not a worker.
Well, he actually said he was a small businessman. These are people who are being.
Well, I don't know what you're what are you What are you saying? That guy's not a worker. So you don't reach out to that guy. You don't reach out to that guy.
You don't reach out to a Boogaloo boy. Not at all.
You don't reach out to somebody. So people who are anti-war, you don't. They're not Americans. So I just showed you what Fred Hampton did in Chicago, and how that changed people. And I could also show you when I go on Tucker Carlson, and I got Tucker Carlson to turn on Julian Assange and freedom of the press. He's saying don't ever do that. He's saying that what Fred Hampton was doing in Chicago was wrong. And that don't ever reach out to people. Even if you're in the same class, which goes against his ideology. You're supposed to be together on class. And he won't even follow his own ideology. That's how blinded this guy is with his own prejudice and hatred for other Americans who share a lot of his same ideas. So you can't come together to work against war with someone?
Well, but this is not, look,
that guy said he's working with Black Lives Matter against police brutality. You can't work. That guy's working, he said he's working with Black Lives Matter against police brutality. So your idea is to not, so we can't talk at the same time. So I let you talk a long time. And we were supposed to talk about the strike, but you come out here to say that someone who's anti-war, anti-ICE, anti-police brutality, you can't work with those people? You know, no common interest?
All right. So.
No, he can't answer that. The answer to that question is no. And now let's watch what he says.
The Boogaloo Boys is an extreme right-wing organization.
So I was asking him about that guy with those beliefs. And he wouldn't want to have an honest conversation. He would not have an honest conversation. He kept caricaturing that guy. He kept putting words in that guy's mouth that he never said. So you could hate him. But that guy wasn't hate. It was hard to hate that guy. That guy was personable and earnest. And what that guy's doing is a smear job. And he won't answer a straight question.
It may pick up all sorts of people who may think they're, from a libertarian bent, who think that they're against big business and against the state and so on. It is an extreme right-wing movement being manipulated by far more powerful forces. And this has nothing to do, look, the working class is made up of workers of all races, of all nationalities, but they have a common class interest. And this pandemic has demonstrated.
That's exactly right.
That there's been massive bailout to Wall Street. It's been mobilized by the most powerful corporate interests. They bailed themselves out, and Trump just mobilized Boogaloo Boys, white supremacists, other reactionaries to invade the capital of the United States because his policy has been no restrictions on the pandemic, no lockdowns.
So you don't want to talk about what that guy, you don't want to talk about what we're talking about?
I am taught. This is what
I'm asking you, how do you reach, so you don't reach out to those people who agree with you on certain topics? You don't agree with other Americans who are workers? If they disagree with you politically, they're not workers anymore. If they're anti-war, they're not anti-war anymore. If they're anti-ICE, they're not anti-ICE anymore. If they're anti-police brutality, they're not anti-police. You just want to keep talking about this COVID? That's all you want to talk about?
Well, I noticed. Well, that's actually the
so
fact that
let's table this conversation.
420,000 people died.
Let's table. Well, that's not what we brought. That's not what we brought you on to talk about. Hey, the nuclear war is important too. That's not what you're on here to talk about. I asked you a straight question, how you reach out to those people, and you're just basically saying you just don't.
Well, no, we don't reach out to fascists.
Okay, well, they're not. So again,
we reach out to workers.
Okay, so when people call you communists, call you communists, how do you respond to that?
I'm a Trotskyist. I have nothing wrong with it. I'm not frightened of that at all. But of course,
so you think that's helpful? So that guy didn't. You didn't think that guy was of goodwill. So you didn't think that guy was earnest and of goodwill. That guy's out of work right now, and you don't think he's earnest. You thought that guy was some kind of. What did you think?
Well, let's.
He said he was anti-racist.
Let's think about this for a minute, Jimmy.
He won't tell me. What did you think of that guy? He won't tell me. He won't. Again, he's just going to keep smearing him as a boogaloo. But it's creepy. It's gross what he's doing. Okay.
Many people that have been mobilized behind Trump, right? Who
that guy doesn't sound like he's a Trumper. That guy sounds like he's against both parties.
And they were told that the cause of their problems are Mexicans.
That's Chinese, not what the fucking that guy was saying, Jerry. That's not what he was saying. You're putting words in his mouth, Jerry. That's not what he was saying. That's not what he was saying. You're just making shit up now. That guy was anti-racist. That guy was anti-racist. You're just making you're arguing something that we're not even fucking talking about, Jerry. That's not what that guy was saying. You're making a caricature of him. You're making a caricature of that guy. That he said exact opposite of everything you just said. That is not helpful, Jerry.
Well, what is the Boogaloo Boys?
I asked him what the Boogaloo Boys was. He said they were a response to the racist right-wingers, and they're not racist right-wingers, and they're anti-war, and they're anti-cop. And did you not hear what he said about the racist right-wingers don't understand when they're anti-cop, when they're and they don't get it. So he explained what they were. If they're pro-LGBT, anti-racist, anti-war, and anti-police brutality, and you still want to shit on those people? That's not. You're not really in goodwill. You're not talking in goodwill. This is fucking horrible what you're doing. So anyway, all right. Well, thanks, Jerry, for coming on. Do you want to talk about the strike? Do you want to talk about the strike at all, or do you want to keep bullshitting like this?
I'll certainly talk about the strike. The strike is a very significant one. 14.
So the strike that he was brought on to talk about was the strike that's happening in New York City, that is in the largest produce market in the world, and they were striking for $1 an hour raise, $40 a week. They wanted to raise. Right now, they're in poverty wages. They make about $37,000 a year, and that's poverty wages for a family of four in New York City. And so that was what we were brought up on to talk about. And all he wanted to talk about was the lockdown and COVID and Boogaloo Boys and Donald Trump. And he didn't want to talk about anything else. It was mental. It was a mental interview. You saw it, and you saw him completely slandering that guy who didn't say anything like the things he said he was saying. So here, I'll play this because it's worthwhile. Here we go.
100 workers have been on strike for a week long. This is in a city where 26,000 people have died from COVID. As I said, at least 6 of these workers have. The banks on Wall Street have been bailed out to the tune of trillions of dollars. So these workers went out on strike because they're fighting for a decent living standard, for a meager $1 raise. The response of the government has been to send the police to the picket lines.
Okay, so there's a little bit more. Let me just stop. So what you're saying, and we've brought this up on the show before, is that even when someone like Bernie Sanders, who's pro-union and pro-worker in the United States, doesn't realize that what we really need is a union of North American workers or all workers internationally, because what that happens is then we pit our auto workers against Mexico's auto workers, and they're pitted against Canada's auto workers. And that's a big problem, right?
Of course it is. And right now, the workers in Matamoros are once again preparing strikes at the maquiladora factories. You had covered that in January 2019, 2 years ago. And the workers in Mexico, in Matamoros, which is on the border with Brownsville, Texas, marched to the border of the United States and they said, "Gringos, wake up. We're in the same struggle." That is left wing, that is socialist, to unite the working class internationally.
Yeah.
The Boogaloo Boys, the fascists are nationalists.
Okay.
They say we have to protect
all right,
our
Jerry,
country.
all right, Jerry, stop it. We talked about it.
It's
Jerry,
significant
stop it.
because
Come on.
we have to clarify workers on these
Those
questions,
people,
not be confused by such questions.
I got you. Jesus Christ. The fucking guy comes on. He says he's pro BLM. He's anti-police. He's anti-war. What the fuck? And you still got to do that. It's just ridiculous. You know, that's the opposite of what you should be doing. You should be trying to find common ground with workers, and then you convince them of the other shit you try to convince them of. You don't run around calling people fucking fascists and racists when they aren't. When they're just regular Americans and they fucking have been shut out of work like everybody else, and they show up at protests to fucking protect Black Lives Matter, and you run around shitting at them like a fucking guy. This doesn't help. That's not helpful. You have some great ideas, but what you're doing is not helpful. That's just ridiculous when you keep doing that over and over. And we had this conversation already. This conversation already about that part is over. Can we talk about the goddamn strike in fucking New York City without you smearing some guy who was just on my show 5 seconds ago who said the exact opposite shit of what you're attributing to him? He said the exact opposite of every fucking thing you're saying he said.
But there's a logic to politics, Jimmy.
Okay.
There's a logic to politics. You can't bring the left and the right together on the basis of we're all opposing the powers that be. There is a fundamental division between left politics, which is for the unity of the working class across national boundaries, for the ending of capitalist private ownership, and right-wing politics, libertarian politics, which is against the minimum wage, which is against the slightest restrictions on business interests. They manipulate the powers that be.
Yeah, so then you fight them on those issues you disagree with, and you join with them on the issues you agree with. Just because I'm joining with a libertarian to oppose war doesn't mean I'm against the minimum wage. That's a totally different thing. So now I can't join with someone who's against war because they have a different view about the minimum wage that I don't share. That's why guys like that's why these guys don't succeed in organizing. That's why. That's why you never heard of him. That's why he's not successful.
Manipulate the discontent of these small businessmen who are being ruined by the economic situation. And they divert them behind their right-wing program. No lockdowns, no restrictions, end regulation. And while at this point these forces are attracted to what Trump said, he was against war and all the rest, when they get going on a war against China and Mr. Steve Bannon and the wars they have to wage against the Chinese Communist Party, that is where the logic of politics takes one.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
our party is completely hostile to such politics.
I'm also hostile to those types of politics, and I'm hostile to Joe Biden's warmongering with China too. I mean, he's exactly the same. They're no different, right?
Well, certainly he is. Yes, the Obama administration in Syria, in Libya, and yes, he has brought together a rainbow coalition of militarists, bankers, to wage the next war. But the fact is, fascism is a very real danger. There was nothing that occurred like January 6th in the history of the United States.
Oh, so except Jerry, Jerry, fascism is from the left and the right in America.
No,
are you kidding that Joe Biden isn't a fascist? For fuck's sake, come on! He wrote the crime bill. We're the world's largest penal institution, and he was for the Iraq War. He did Libya. Did Syria. Wait, come on! Now he's gonna go into Venezuela. He just put troops back into Syria. You're telling me he's not a fascist? He's a complete fascist. He's a complete fascist. He's completely controlled by corporations and the military-industrial complex. He's anti-worker. He's every horrible thing you can think of. What are you talking about? He's not a fascist. So this idea that
he has to be fought from the left, not from the right.
That's of course.
He has to be fought from the left.
That's right.
Which means mobilizing the working class.
That's right.
Breaking its illusions in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party.
Right. Of course.
And understanding the real dangers. The real danger. Look. Trump, when Biden talks about unity,
but wait a minute. You say going into the Republican Party, Jerry. You just said we can't reach out to those people. You just said not to do that.
No, I'm saying not to reach out to the Boogaloo Boys. We're reaching out to the working class. When Biden says he wants unity, he's talking about unity with the Republican co-conspirators that tried to overthrow his government.
That's the wrong kind of unity
that the Democrats are talking about, and the unity that Sanders covers up and AOC covers up from the nature of the Democratic Party is a unity against genuine socialism. And they're rushing to cover up the real dangers of January 6th, to put it all behind them. We're fighting for an investigation into the storming of the Capitol, how the Republicans prepared that, holding those accountable, because the overthrow of the U.S. Constitution is ultimately aimed at the working class, of stripping the working class. Fascism is aimed at eliminating all democratic rights of the working class, preventing any organized opposition, smashing the working class.
Yes.
And our opposition to Biden is from the left.
Yes.
We're not joining in, with the extreme right. We did not jump on the bandwagon and say it's the horror of horrors that Trump's Twitter count was taken away.
So again, another short-sighted lefty who doesn't understand how censorship works. The censorship, how it starts when you're happy about it, it never ends up that way. It always ends up you're unhappy. The first time they censor, you're happy. The second time, you're unhappy. And we just showed you that they just started taking down socialist websites. They just started taking down socialist websites, and he's cheering it on. So this is, again, what's wrong with the left. They have this authoritarian streak. They want to control other people's speech. They think censorship is good, and that it'll never come back to bite them. That's someone who has no understanding of history, has zero sense of history, even recent history. Because as soon as you start giving into the establishment and the surveillance state, and you start going along with fascism, which is what censorship is, it comes back to bite you. Just like Bernie Sanders. When he Russiagated, I said it's going to come back and bite, and they Russiagated him right before Super Tuesday, and he got screwed. So, of course, and they use Russiagate to censor the left. That's what they're using it for. We have to control the Russian bot. It's all, of course. And he's cheering, he's part of the problem. He's part of the problem. These are the guys who don't understand how shit works. They have no sense of history. They don't know how to talk to workers. They don't know how to bring people together. But he knows how to say he's a Trotsky. That's everything he's saying is nuts. I don't know any way else to say it.
The ruling class in this country, the oligarchy, is not going to give up its wealth any more than the slaveocracy did give up its slaves. It took a civil war. It took a revolution.
So that guy sounds pretty violent as far as that goes. He's calling for a revolution and a civil war. It's going to take a civil war and a revolution. Now, if you heard a right-wing boogaloo boy saying that, you would be like, what? This guy's calling for a revolution. He's calling for they got to have invested January 6th, and we got to get an investigation.
The ruling class in this country, the oligarchy, is not going to give up its wealth any more than the slaveocracy did give up its slaves. It took a civil war. It took a revolution, but not what the previous guest was talking. His idea of revolution. Who knows what his idea of revolution is? Unite the left and right. No, it's not and he pointed to Syria as the model.
No. He said he's afraid that's what would happen in our country if things go to shit. So again, he's completely turning on his head what my guest said, what that guy said. He didn't say that. He said what would happen if the government turns its back on its people like it continues to do, then it will fall into what happened to Syria. There was like 16, he's going to say there's like 16 different factions all fighting each other. Sometimes you fight each other, then sometimes you fight with each other to fight someone else, and then you come back. That's what he was afraid of. The guy he's talking about who I had on my show, and he's pretending like that guy was saying we need to have it like Syria, which is, again, it's just hyperbolic lies. These are just propaganda. And he wasn't fact-based, not one time that he talked about that guy. Now, he could have said, I don't want to talk about that guy. I want to talk about the Boogaloo Boys. That'd have been a different conversation. But he kept saying that guy and that he can't reach out to that guy, and that guy's a fascist. And that's why guys like that are failures when it comes to organizing, and that's why they repel workers, and they don't know how to bring them together. And that's why there's no left in America. That's not what he was hoping for. He was saying that would be the horrible.
Well, but that's what those politics lead to. It isn't coherence.
Not
it isn't
his politics.
It isn't a class politics.
Jerry, I agree with you. If the caricature of him that you are saying was true, I would agree with you. But you're making a caricature of him again. You just keep. You can say that about the right wing, but that guy who was on my show.
Why is he in the Boogaloo Boys? Why was he in the demonstration in Lansing? Why was he out there protecting Black Lives Matters? Why was he out there protecting LGBT? Why was he out there against anti-war? So you're doing a caricature of him, Jerry. I appreciate it. I get it. I've been as outraged as you at things too, but you're misguided on that guy who was just on my show. He said the exact opposite things that you keep attributing to him. So you can't do that. That's just not fair. You can't do that. I've heard this before, and you said it isn't a matter of left versus right.
Right.
It's top versus bottom.
Yes,
no,
it's class struggle. You don't think it's a class struggle?
Yeah, it is. But
is that a left-right issue, or is that a fucking top-down?
Yeah, it's a left-right issue.
That's a class struggle. Is it a class struggle?
Yes.
And that's left-right?
And the class has to be conscious.
So he stepped in it there. A class struggle is not left or right. It's class. Class means no left or right. Means you come together because of your class. So someone who's a right-winger or a libertarian or a socialist or whatever, or a communist, if they're in the same class, they're in the same class. That's the class struggle. And he knows he just stepped in it, and he knows he's saying the wrong thing, and I got him, and that's why I'm fucking smiling like an idiot. Because I know he just stepped in it, and he knows he did, and he knows he just blew it. And he knows he doesn't have a message for people who agree with most of his fucking positions. He doesn't have a message to them. He's about pushing those. He's about building up his identity about who he hates. His identity is about all who he's against. And that's a losing message.
Of its aims.
Okay.
Right? Look,
Jerry,
the Nazis called themselves National Socialists.
Yes, I got you, Jerry.
For a reason.
Okay.
They presented themselves as anti-establishment.
I hear you. I know. Jerry, I know.
They presented themselves as plebeian.
I hear what you're saying. That guy is not what you thought. That
but
no matter how many
it was the capitalists. They tried to say the capitalists were the international Jewish conspiracy.
I got Jerry. I got you. Bankers. We all know the history. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I wish we all.
Jerry White, the editor of the World Socialist website. We wish you great success in your work, organizing workers. That's great work. That's amazing that you're doing that. And I hope if we can help out, let us know. We'd love to help out. And we love the work you do at the World Socialist website. It's a real socialist website, unlike other socialist websites. So, and I don't mind having a spirited dispute or whatever you call this discussion with you. So I appreciate you coming on and doing that and presenting your point of view. And I hope you, and again, continued great work. And we'll love to have you back on.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, buddy. Okay, so that was tough. That was tough for me to sit through. That was tough. because I do love the World Socialist website. And that was unfortunate that he didn't want to come on and talk about that strike. He wanted to talk about everything else but that strike. He wanted to talk about how upset he was about January 6th. And that's not what we brought him on to talk about. We've covered January 6th in other segments.
I just want to tell you, you invited Daniel.
I invited, no, there was the different person who wrote the original article.
Okay.
We invited on the person who wrote the original article that we covered a couple of days ago. And that person demurred and said, oh, I would be better to have this guy on that we just had on. He's the editor. He's the labor editor, and he would be better to have on. And I said, I'd rather have you on. And he said, no. So I'm like, okay, we'll have him on. So that's probably the last time we're going to do that.
Yeah, that's
Not that last time we'll have him on. I'll have him back on. I'm just saying that normally when I'm covering a story, I like to bring on the reporter who wrote the story instead of the editor. So that's happened a couple times where they wanted the editor to come on instead of the reporter. And I've said no before. This time I said yes. I don't know why I did. I don't know why I did.
We wanted to cover this.
But I wanted it because I really wanted to cover it. But it was even, I guess it's even more instructive of how not to organize. That's how you should not organize. Go around calling everybody who's slightly, again, calling everybody a Nazi. He's calling someone a Nazi who he said, if you watch the interview, said the requirement to be in his group is that you're not a racist. That's a big one. And he was the guy who I had on the show. He was saying that the bad thing about censoring these right-wing Nazis is that they would go on social media and they would out themselves as being violent, or they would out themselves as being a Nazi, or out themselves as being, racist. And then you knew who they were and they could get them out of their group. But now that they've been banned from social media, it's harder to weed those people out. So that's another problem with censorship. So it's weird. Again, there's lots of problems with that. He just called everybody who doesn't align with him as a Nazi, even if they're completely opposite of a Nazi. You're a Nazi. And he's pro-censorship for people he doesn't agree with politically. That's a recipe for a failure of the left, and now you know why the left has failed in the United States. There is no left in America, and that's a big reason why. That's a big if you go ahead. So go watch my interview with what is his name? Magnus. Go watch my interview with him, and then you can watch this again, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It was very unfortunate. I don't want to venture into any personality assessment or whatever. I don't know why he couldn't help himself, but again, there's that authoritarian pro-censorship streak in the left, which is just bad thinking. So he just has a lot of bad thinking. He's obviously read Marx, but he doesn't know how to implement it. He doesn't know how to talk to workers. He doesn't know how to talk to people. He doesn't know how to bring people together. He's pro-censorship. All the bad things that you shouldn't be on the left. It's up to the left to have a message for people when they're in economic hardships like this, when they're vulnerable to right-wing demagogues. You don't push them to them. You give them a message to bring them over. You don't push them into the hands of right-wing demagogues. You fascists, get the fuck away. You try to have a message for them why your program would be beneficial. That's how you do it. How do you do it? This is how you do it. That's how you do it. That's the Black fucking Panthers. And what happens when you do it that way? Eventually, the young patriots rejected their deeply embedded ideas of white supremacy and even dropped the Confederate flag as they realized how much they had in common with the Black Panthers and Latino young lords. Despite many differences, the groups united under the umbrella of economic justice. So what Jerry's supposed to be doing is bringing that guy under his umbrella, under the guise of economic justice. Even though they have many differences, they have a lot in common. So if Confederate flag-waving racists can come together with Black Panthers and Latino young lords, that guy can't reach out to a worker. That's why that guy's a failure, and that's why the left is non-existent in the United States. And that's why you're going to have more people doing what he doesn't like to do. People taking over their state capitals. You have to have a program to meet people's needs, Jerry. And you have to have a message. And he doesn't have either. It's a shame. Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.